Hey everyone, Tim here from SnapAttack. Let's dig into this week's Threat SnapShot. Today we're going to be talking about Okta, an identity and access management provider, and they've been in the news quite a bit already this year. Back in January, it was when the Lapsus group breached their networks and exposed customer data, and more recently this week it's been some news about security researchers finding flaws that can expose clear text credentials. You may have seen these articles like this one on Dark Reading or this one on Threat Post. Or maybe you even got back to Optimize, this was the original research team, and read their blog about their findings. Definitely worth checking out. You may have also seen this mega thread on Twitter. I will say up front that this is not a vulnerability. This is not going to have a CVE ID assigned to it. Really, this is a flaw, and it's not even a flaw in Okta itself, but it's a separate protocol. To give this a named bug, to call this pass bleed, to even compare this to heartbleed is a gross over-exaggeration of the severity. But that said, identity and access management is super critical for any organization. Again, if we think about this threat in the context of the MITRE attack framework, really that we can see malicious insiders or we can see compromised valid accounts. If you have access to Okta and you have the ability to deploy these applications, this is how you can get these clear text credentials, and that really exposes, again, all of your organization data. You can certainly move laterally, escalate privileges. Again, it could be game over, as they say here, and there is definitely severity around here, but do want to kind of talk through what exactly this is and where the scope is. So to give a little bit of background, this flaw is in the System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, or SCIM. This is really a protocol. Again, it's published by the IETF. It's open and used by many different vendors here. I mean, if we scroll down and we see these list of names, there's going to be quite a few that are going to be familiar. So this flaw isn't necessarily in Okta itself, but it's partially in how this SCIM protocol works. So if we think about that for a second, cross-domain, what Okta is doing is if you're going to log in there to the application with a username and password, they may have to authenticate against another domain. Think about like a Windows domain controller in maybe an internal or legacy environment. So they're going to broker that password over to that second domain for authentication. And really, when you think about identity access management and passwords, password hashes, there's multiple different formats. Again, it might be NTLM in a Windows domain environment, could be MD5, SHA hashes. There really is no standardized and secure way to pass a password. So that's why these are passed in clear text. And ultimately where a lot of this kind of flaw comes from is, installing a malicious SCIM application provider. So let's take a look at this in SnapAttack. And really one thing I want to point out is SnapAttack is great at analyzing any log data that you have. You've seen we've talked about cloud and how we've taken Stratus Red Team and brought some of those into the platform. Identity access management, Okta logs, and other similar log types is really no different. So as long as you've got these event logs, you can certainly add them to your SIEM, your data lake, and you can create detections for those in SnapAttack. So I guess diving back into this thread a little bit more closely, we've got an Okta developer account and we're just using their default SCIM application. This is that Okta SCIM Flask example. The research team, there's another one, this Go SCIM, if you like Golang. But ultimately, this is just that secondary application that's going to do that brokering and ultimately where that clear text credential is going to be passed. Can actually take a look at this session in SnapAttack. We'll play the video and kind of talk through this. We're here on a Kali Linux application. We've got that Okta SCIM Flask application installed. You can see here that there's no requests that have been started for authentication. And we're also logged into Okta itself. This whole flaw requires you to be an application administrator. This isn't necessarily considered a privileged account or privileged access, so it could be granted to different people in your organization. Ultimately, part of the defense here is making sure that you can lock this down to only those that need access to it. But what we are going to do here is configure this SCIM application, and you're going to see some of these configurations here. We're going to, again, pass the Okta password to it and set that up. We can actually kind of jump ahead here and see This is going to be configured to send to our application. So ultimately, any user that's going to authenticate to Okta, it's also going to authenticate against this secondary domain and the secondary authentication mechanism. So you can see here that sync password is being set, and we're going to, again, send the Okta password. And that's really where that flaw is, where it gets set in clear text. Can hop ahead here. So we've got this application installed. It's going to do some things where it's going to sync users to the external app. You can see some of those requests here. Again, this by default isn't syncing the passwords, but when a user will go to log in, and we can actually hop here a little bit further where we're going to log out of Okta, and we've got this new user account that we created, new user at SnapAttack, and we've got this password. So when we actually go to log in, it's going to capture that clear text password and send that over to that SCIM app. So you can see that here, we've got that clear text password, aptly named clear text password. And that's really where the vulnerability lies, is they didn't have to log into a secondary application. It's this application that's also forwarding and brokering that authentication request. So lots of good things here. Again, if you've got Okta logs that you're passing along to your data lake or to your SIEM, you can certainly hunt for those. We've got a couple of analytics here that we can talk through. This first one here is a possible SCIM application being installed. Really, if we wanted to take a look at what this logs looks like, is it's this system import complete event type. And you can basically look through the name and see, is this a trusted application? Is this something that I'm aware of? Really, again, this would be a good practice if you can't completely lock down who has the ability to install these applications, is just monitor and review when new SCIM applications, or really new applications at all, are being added to Okta. Secondary here, we've got this analytic around users being synced to an external application. Again, this is part of that installation process, and it's really this event type application provision user sync. You can see here, it's got the target information. So we've got this new user that's being synced over to this SCIM application that we have. Finally here, this is again the main one, is this Okta password push. So this event type here, it's that app user management push Okta password update. This is where that password is being pushed to an external system. You can see here within the target parameter that we've got that new user account that is being pushed over to this SCIM application. So ultimately, this analytic is how you would see when accounts are being pushed outside of Okta, and this is where you would want to take a look. So all of these analytics, again, with some tuning, would be very good for threat hunting in your organization, possibly alerting depending on rarity. If we want to talk mitigations, again, this really factors around least privilege. So if you don't have the application administrator permissions given to more users than needed in the organization, that is ultimately going to restrict this flaw, because that permission is needed in order to install this SCIM application. Another thing that most organizations are going to be using is multi-factor authentication. So even if the clear text password is breached, they still wouldn't have access to that second factor, and that second factor would still be needed to complete the authentication. So wish more of the articles did cite that, but if you are using MFA, this really shouldn't be a big deal for you. That said, obviously you would want to try and mitigate these as best you can. Do also want to say that there are going to be a lot more attacks coming in for Okta and SnapAttack for our subscribers. We're working right now on adding this Dorothy framework put out by Elastic, so probably going to feature this in a future snapshot. Similar to Stratus Red Team or Atomic Red Team, this is a way that you can run through and automate a lot of different attacks within your Okta environment. So really cool framework. Wanted to give that a little tease for the future. Again, SnapAttack, awesome application for being able to run real-world threats, create detections, automate and deploy those attacks as simulations in your environment, and really test and validate your security controls. So definitely check us out. Check out our website. If you like this series, like, subscribe, follow us. We always love to dive into threats, and we'll see you next week.